I want to say something that many people, or almost nobody, says in the healing and therapeutic world, or nobody's willing to say out loud. Now, most people who come to me have been doing the work for years, sometimes decades. Therapy, somatic work, breath work, plant medicine retreats, trainings, the whole nine yards. They have the language, they have the self awareness, they can name their patterns, track their nervous system, describe their attachment style, identify their shadow projections. By every available measure, they've done the work. And something fundamental has not moved. And it's not for lack of effort, and it's not for lack of sincerity, and it's not because the modalities were wrong or the practitioners were not skilled. Something I've noticed hasn't moved because there is a distinction nobody has helped them make at the beginning. And it's a distinction that is so simple, so precise, and so consistently overlooked that once you hear it, you'll wonder how the entire therapeutic world managed to build itself without it. The distinction is this: change is not transformation. Almost everything the healing world currently offers is change. When people decide they need to change, they genuinely decide they need to change, and with real commitment and real courage, they enact it in one of three ways. They do something more, they do something better, or they do something different. More therapy, better boundaries, a different relationship, a new career, more meditation, a different modality, a better morning routine. Every single one of those moves, however sincere, however sustained, however skillfully supported, is performed by the existing self, using the existing self's tools within the existing self's understanding of what life is and what it's for. That's the problem right there. That's the whole problem. Change is something the existing self does. Transformation is something that happens to the existing self. It's something it undergoes, and it undergoes often without choosing it, that it cannot engineer from its own framework because the framework is precisely what has to change. More assumes the direction is right, and the problem is insufficient quantity. Better assumes the existing self is essentially correct, and the problem really is performance. Different, and this is the most seductive of the three, it convincingly masquerades as transformation: a new relationship, a new city, a new career, a new spiritual path. These all feel significant because the external coordinates have shifted. But if the same self that created the old situation is now navigating the new one, you've rearranged the furniture in the same house, which is precisely why people leave one relationship and find the identical dynamic playing out in the next. Why they change careers and recreate the same patterns in a different professional context. Why they move across the world and discover, somewhat inconveniently, they've arrived at the other end. More, better, different. The three strategies of a self that hasn't yet understood that it is the problem. It's not a broken self. It's not a bad self. It's a self that has simply reached the absolute limit of what self modification can accomplish and is being asked by the accumulated pressure of its own unlived life to undergo something it cannot engineer from the inside. I want to tell you about someone I worked with who was a fascinating client. I'm going to call him David. So David arrived at 52. He was a successful architect. He had two adult children. He had a practice he'd built from nothing that was, by any external measure, it was thriving. He's been in therapy for 6 years with a skilled and caring therapist. He's done a 10-day silent meditation retreat. He exercises daily. He eats really well. He sleeps adequately. He was, in the language of the wellness world, doing everything right. He sat across from me and he said, I feel like I'm watching my life through glass. That phrase, through glass, tells me he was present, but not inside of it. He was functional, but not inhabiting it. He was going through the motions of a life that fit him perfectly on paper and feeling almost nothing. Now, his previous therapy had helped him understand why he felt the way he felt, the childhood dynamics, the patterns of emotional suppression, the early decisions that had shaped his choices. He understood all of it with remarkable clarity, and the understanding had changed nothing, because understanding is a change operation. It modifies what you know about the existing structure, but it doesn't touch the structure itself. What nobody had asked David in 6 years of skilled, sincere therapeutic work was the question I asked him in the third session. Here's the question: what grew in you that your life no longer has room for? What grew in you that your life no longer has room for? He went quiet for a long time. And this wasn't the polite quiet of someone thinking. The particular quality of silence that arrives when something true is about to be said for the first time. Then he said, I became an architect because my father expected it. I've known since I was 30 that I should have been a sculptor, not as a hobby, but as my life. 22 years. He had known for 22 years. And in 6 years of therapy, in 10 days of silent meditation, in all the work and all the genuine effort, nobody had found that. Or more precisely, nobody had known to look for it, because the therapeutic framework they were working within was oriented towards helping David function better. And to function better within the life he had, not toward asking whether the life he had was the right container for who David actually was. That's the distinction that matters. And it brings me to the image I want to offer you, because it describes what was happening in David's life more precisely than any psychological framework I know. Imagine a lobster. A lobster grows inside a very rigid shell. The shell is not an accident, it's a genuine solution to a real problem. It provides structure, protection, and definition. And for a time, it is exactly what's needed. But the lobster keeps growing quietly, persistently, without asking permission. The life inside the shell expands. And at a certain point, not dramatically, not with announcement, the pressure building from within makes the shell not a protection, but a constraint. That constraint then becomes the threat. The very structure that once enabled life is now the thing that would end it if something didn't give way. So the lobster does something that looks from the outside like a catastrophe. It sheds the shell entirely. It becomes temporarily soft, completely vulnerable, its vision clouded, its movement slower. And I would guess that every predator in the ocean is suddenly a genuine danger. Now, from the outside, this looks like breakdown, like something has gone terribly wrong, but nothing has gone wrong. The lobster is between versions of itself. The softness is not weakness. It is the necessary condition for what comes next. And here's what makes this image complete, what makes it more than a metaphor and closer to a precise description of how transformation works. When the lobster sheds its shell, it doesn't discard it, it consumes it. It takes the calcium from the old structure and uses it to build the new, larger one. So the old container becomes the material for what comes next. So nothing's wasted. The dissolution feeds the reconstruction. That is transformation. Not more, not better, and not different. A genuine outgrowing, a shedding that was necessitated not by failure, but by growth, a period of radical vulnerability that is not pathology, but process, and a rebuilding that uses everything that came before, including the pain of the constriction, including the years inside the wrong container. This was the very material from which something larger is made. Now, going back to David's 22 years of knowing and not acting, of living through glass and not doing everything right and feeling almost nothing, I would suggest none of that was wasted. It was the calcium in the old shell. It became, in the work that we did together, the precise material from which he began to build something that fitted the life growing inside of him. He didn't leave his practice overnight. He didn't blow up his marriage. Real transformation rarely looks like dramatic external rupture. That's the Hollywood version. What changed first was internal and almost invisible, a different quality of presence to ask the question he'd been avoiding for 2 decades. A small act, apparently minor, but irreversible, like a seed casing cracking, like a shell beginning finally to give way. This is what I want you to sit with after this transmission ends, not whether you relate to David's story, though if something in it moved you, that movement is worth paying attention to. But this question asked of your own life, as honestly as you can manage, what is growing inside you that your current life no longer has room for? Let me say that again. What is growing inside of you that your current life no longer has room for? Because if something is growing, and something always is, then the pressure you're feeling is not malfunction. The restlessness is not ingratitude. The sense that something fundamental hasn't moved despite all the work is not failure. It may be just the shell doing exactly what shells do when the life inside of them has finally outgrown them. And the healing world's instinct, however well-intentioned, however skillfully delivered, is almost always to repair the shell. It's to help you feel more comfortable inside of it, to regulate the discomfort of the constriction rather than recognize it as information. Which brings me to the only question that matters right now. And it's not, how do I feel better? And it's not, how do I do this differently? And it's not, what tools do I need? But it's this, what are you healing back into? If that question landed somewhere real, if something in the last few minutes cracked something open that you're tempted to patch back over, don't patch it. Sit in it, sit with it, because that crack is not evidence of damage. It's the first honest thing that has happened in a long time. You know where to find me, consciousnesscompass.com.